Alright, welcome back everybody. We got part 5 of this Heliocentrism and the Luciferian Scientific Dictatorship. I'm excited about this one because it has the circumambulation information in it. So let's jump right into this, because in the last one we were discussing Newton. Okay, so in this one we'll go into Einstein a little bit. I have not as yet been able to discover the reason for the properties of gravity from the phenomena, and I do not feign hypothesis. For whatever is not deduced from the phenomena must be called a hypothesis, and hypotheses, whether metaphysical or physical, or based on occult qualities, or mechanical, have no place in experimental philosophy. In this philosophy, particular propositions are inferred from phenomena and afterwards rendered general by induction. So this is Newton's basically telling you he did not do any science behind this gravity thing, this mass attracting mass, because it's not science. Okay, so into the this gentleman here has a skill set for wearing women's shoes. He has a skill set for repurposing and stealing things and things of that nature. So, in general relativity, gravity is not a force between masses. Instead, gravity is an effect of the warping of space and time in the presence of mass. Okay? So, we have an unseating of this mass attracting mass. Okay? So, I put a couple different quotes in there, but first, for instance, Einstein created his general theory of relativity, which provides our modern understanding of gravity, with the express purpose of expunging non-locality from physics. Isaac Newton's gravity acted at a distance as if by magic, and general relativity snapped the wand in two, by showing that the curvature of space-time, and not an invisible force, gives rise to gravitational attraction. So now we're talking about in effect. That is the end of Newtonian physics. There's a reason I'm putting these in here. First, I want to tell you what goes wrong with Newtonian mechanics. The double slit experiment is a problem. That's what puts the nail in the coffin for Newtonian physics. Today we're going to shoot down Newtonian mechanics and Maxwell's theory. We're like the press. We build somebody up only to destroy them. Build up Newton, shot down. Build up Maxwell, gonna get shot down. So, why then, in this right here, I recommend anybody, whether they believe in heliocentrism or don't, highly recommend anyone under the sun to check out this episode. It's well into the Bonanza thing, season 7, episode 6, and it's a profound piece of propaganda. But this teacher that's on the left here, the top left picture with the sphere, she's teaching these kids on the top right, these Quaker kids, this stuff about Newton and the sphere, and they're questioning her like, why wouldn't you just fall off the bottom of it and this and that? And she starts talking about gravity and mass attracting mass and Newton. So my question is, because I've had several, I can't even count how many conversations I've had with people who believe in this gravity thing, who you ask them, what is gravity? They say mass attracting mass. You're like, well, wait a minute. Wasn't that unseated? Wasn't that unseated like a long time ago? And they're like, no. It just added on to it. So it's like, added on to it. Ending Newtonian physics is not adding on to it, right? So why then, in this piece of propaganda, keep in mind, for context, this piece of propaganda was after they announced we are allegedly going to go to the moon, and before we allegedly landed on the moon, right? Because landing on the moon would then embed the concept that there's these spheres that you can literally land and walk around on top of. So why then is this teacher teaching these kids about Newtonian gravity, when this is already decades after Newtonian gravity getting pummeled? By necessity, I would argue. By necessity, it was pummeled. But so what's going on here? Why, in my opinion, I think it's simpler and easier to brainwash people with this. And not only that, they have years of indoctrination of this rhetoric. So they're just rolling with it. So even to this day, in 2022, you talk to somebody about gravity, and they're invoking something that's very, very outdated. So I just found that interesting. Another thing I find interesting is this pastor that they have with the black hat here is a Quaker pastor, right? So if you're a Christian, or you have Christian family who believe in heliocentrism, just ask them, why would Bonanza do an entire episode demonizing the Quakers? Why would they make an entire episode during the time that this aired in the 50s or whatever? I think it was late 50s. Why would they make the Quakers look like old-fashioned, evil flat earthers? Why? By the end of this episode, they're putting her, like they're burning her at the stake. Like some crazy old ignorant people, like Christians trying to burn people at the stake for knowing science. This is propaganda at its finest. It's, who knows how many people were flipped because of this. Imagine you're 16 years old in 1958. And for the past 1900 years, Christians have believed in a stationary earth with a sun that moves around above it. Remember, the reformers were extremely anti-heliocentrism. So for the first 1900 years of Christianity, they believed in a stationary earth, as the Bible said. And then recently, going into the 30s and 40s and 50s, we now have Christians that are believing in this heliocentrism. Then you need very powerful propaganda like this to sever your connection to the last 1900 years. Okay? So imagine you're 16 years old, you're Christian or identify as Christian, your parents are Christian, but your parents are old-fashioned flat earthers and stuff, and you watch this. This is trying to create a chasm between the future cucked Christians and the old ones. I know that's very blunt and direct, but, and it's speculation based on what I'm seeing. Okay, so can we formulate physical laws? Again, this is a must see. Now get this, just really quick. Just like several months ago, I went to visit my family, my parents, and my mom and my stepdad up in Northern California, right? And I brought this episode up specifically because they've seen every episode of Bonanza and are fully, and my stepdad loves Bonanza, right? So he's seen every episode like 100 times. And he watched it back in the day and everything when it came out live. So I asked him directly, I said, have you seen the Devil on Her Shoulder episode, season 7, episode 6? And they're like, no, and this and that. I'm like, well, I will pay for it, whatever streaming services you got, because I think they had Amazon and something else. They had like 3 different streaming services. Instead of having cable, they just have like a smart TV where they have different streaming services. So I'm like, go ahead and just look up season 7, episode 6. If it costs money or whatever, I'll just pay for it. So they went to Bonanza on their streaming service, and I swear to you, they skipped this episode. It went, when they went to season 7, it went episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. Like, seriously. I'm like, they took this episode out. Why would they do that? So I asked them directly, why would they take... Why was a 1950s episode... Their response was, oh, maybe it was too controversial. So I'm like, you're telling me, with all the stuff they show on TV, the wicked, insane crap they show on TV, that a 1950s episode of Bonanza was too controversial? Really? Does that make sense to you? Sorry, I had to drop that in, and we'll move on. Can we formulate physical laws so that they are valid for all CS, i.e. coordinate systems, reference frames, whatever? Not only those moving uniformly, but also those, not reference frames, but also those moving quite arbitrarily relative to each other. If this can be done, our difficulties will be over. We shall then be able to apply the laws of nature to any CS. The struggle, so violent in the early days of science, between the views of Ptolemy and Copernicus, would then be quite meaningless. Either CS could be used with equal justification. The two sentences, the sun is at rest and the earth moves, or the sun moves and the earth is at rest, would simply mean two different conventions concerning two different coordinate systems. It's a choice. That's Einstein. Ernst Mach considered that only the observable phenomena should enter into the laws of empirical science, such as physics. Whether the earth rotates once a day from west to east, as Copernicus taught, or the heavens revolve once a day from east to west. Sorry, couldn't even say the word. As his predecessors believed, the observable phenomena will be exactly the same. Nevertheless, Newtonian dynamics will explain Foucault's pendulum and the flattening of the earth at the poles if the earth rotates, but not if the heavens revolve. This shows a defect in Newtonian dynamics, since an empirical science ought not contain a metaphysical assumption which can never be proved or disproved by observation. And no observations can distinguish the rotation of the earth from the revolution of the heavens. This philosophical principle, that distinctions which make no difference to observable phenomena must play no part in physics, has inspired a good deal of work on relativity and advocated by many writers. Alright, that's Russell. Okay, so what do we have here? You ask somebody, you say, what is gravity? They go, oh, it's an effect. It's 9.8 meters per second squared, I believe, is the average that we've measured gravity at. You're like, oh, so you measured gravity. You're like, so what is causing gravity? They go, oh, gravity. You go, oh, okay, so gravity is a cause. Okay? And so you're saying, oh, so the effect of 9.8 meters per second squared falling is caused by 9.8 meters per second squared falling. They're like, no, that's silly. It's the effect. Gravity's the effect. You're like, okay, what's causing it? They're like, the 9.8 meters per second squared. Duh. Oh, man. This is not a scientific presentation. I'm not some scientist. I'm not going to harp on this. I'm just briefly giving some context to people that are unfamiliar with it. Chances are someone watching this is familiar with this anyway. But it's an endless circular argument, okay? And this was recognized. That's why it's like, okay, what is gravity? And they had to switch the whole thing up with Einstein and all that. And it's still absolutely insane. Because they go, well, 9.8 meters per second is the effect. And what's causing that is the bending of space-time. And they have no experiments to back that up, of course. I'm not going in on this. This is just for context. We got centrifugal force, right? And this so-called centripetal. So obviously you cut the string of this bucket this woman is swinging around her head. The bucket goes flying. I don't need to spend a bunch of time on this. I don't even care about arguing with trolls or any of that shit. So we got circular movement, and imagine this. Things flay outwards. You see these people? They're not being pulled to the center of that thing. They're flying outwards. So what were to happen if you cut those strings? What were to happen if this, and this is mixing paradigms, what if the center of that wheel was in the imaginary atmosphere of Earth and these people were outside of it where there's allegedly a vacuum without wind resistance? So you mean to tell me they're just going to, if I cut the string, they're just going to fucking orbit that thing? Let's get real. So I did another video where I did like a long, like 15-minute video of Brian Mullen. I'm not doing that right here. This is just like a 4-minute clip just on the centrifugal force. And then after that, we'll go into the circumambulation.
We'll go back
because
to keeping it simple.
This is simple here, too.
Centripetal force, Fc.
If math's not your thing, it looks intimidating, but just bear with me here.
C is equal to the mass of the object orbiting the sun, which we still have as the Earth here, or Jupiter, or Mars, or whatever you want it to be, times the velocity of that planet, or wandering star, divided by the distance from the sun, R, is equal to the gravitational constant times the little m, which is the mass of Jupiter, or Mars, or Earth, or whatever, times big M, which is the mass of the sun, alright, I'm sun here, clarify that, times the distance that object is from the sun squared, and that's equal to the force of gravity. These are said to be equal And this is how the solar system was built, or that's how we applied numbers, or they applied numbers to our solar system. Okay. Well, this math is canceled.
So when he's showing that when he solves the equation, that can be eliminated on both
now,
sides.
If you just cover this side, look over here, this is no longer a force. You need this mass to have a force, right? Just like you need a force down here. Or if you cover this side, this is no longer a force because the gravitational constant needs the units of mass, in this case kilograms squared. So this is no longer a force. So if you cancel out these little masses, you cancel out the force. You can't have your cake and eat it too, so to say. This defies logic, in my opinion. How can you say that the mass of the object orbiting the sun does not matter? It does, because that's what creates the force.
The proportional equation.
The force goes away. So then what happens? This doesn't make sense. But if you go back to that equation that I showed,
in the proportional equation, the mass will change the force.
G.
It's irreconcilable.
Just to show this again, times the mass of the sun, times the period of the object orbiting the sun, how long it takes to go around one time, divided by 4 pi squared. If you take the period of any of the planets, I did all the planets, even Earth, or the wandering stars, and you plug this time in, you get the exact radius, roughly the exact radius that NASA has on their fact sheet from every one of the planets. Their fact sheet.
The math works no matter what you plug, what small mass you plug in.
I've looked into this for a while, and I've been aware of how masses are calculated. So say, how do you figure out the mass of the object that's orbiting the sun then? Because this says that the sun wins. The mass doesn't matter. I don't know. Well, what they say is they observe the object. They observe Jupiter, for example, and they observe the moons that they tell us are orbiting Jupiter. And they can tell by the tug and the pull back and forth. So, I don't know. Let's say that this is Jupiter and this is...
They don't even know how big Jupiter is.
See the little wobble it gets from the...
But they can look at Jupiter and the wobble of the moons.
The wobble effect on the planet, that they can estimate the mass. Yeah, maybe they compare.
It's a light in the sky.
Is the relationship between the sun and the Earth?
These people are bat crazy, dude.
It's all from observation. It's kind of guessing, I think. Lots of guessing.
It's inarguably guessing. You're observing a light in the sky.
Blown away by this, especially because NASA tells us that these are facts. But it doesn't matter if their estimation's wrong according to this equation, because mass doesn't matter, right? But it does matter. This equation right here, this gravity equation, causes these two forces to cancel out. Just like in episode 2, when you set this equation equal to the weight equation,
that was a small hand sign.
Mass is eliminated.
He was showing both sides of the equation. I'll give him a pass, but I'm looking at him. I got my eyes open.
How have we gotten this far?
Because people are batshit crazy. Because mathematics can take you wherever you want it to take you. It's religious. Bessel, he discovered the long sought... I'll briefly speak on this and then we'll go into the next section. Bessel, he discovered the long sought stellar parallax. Allegedly, the extremely tiny shift in the apparent position of a star when observed from opposite sides of the Earth's orbit. Since the size of the Earth's orbit was known, the observed parallax angle allowed Bessel to calculate the distance to the star 61 Cygni by triangulation. This discovery also provided the most convincing proof that the Earth really moves around the sun. Oh shit, he said, okay, he didn't say this, but this discovery also provided the most convincing proof that the Earth really moves around the sun. So these people are just presupposing lights in the sky and what they are and what their distances are. They're triangulating based on false presuppositions. And this is the most convincing proof that the Earth really moves around the sun? You guys are fucking comedians, dude. Oh man, I've seen more science, more convincing science in 5th grade, man. Come on, y'all. Come on, y'all. Don't get me started on the penumbra and umbra and the light rays and the diverging and converging sun rays and all this stuff, man. It's so absurd. Long story short, just like many parts of this heliocentric model, it doesn't add up. When you're a liar, you have to continue to lie and have a great memory. And not only do you have to have a great memory, you have to tell lies that align with your previous lies. So what happens is after a year, 2 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, the lies add up. I mean, they add up, but they don't add up, right? Because you can't, no one's that damn good at lying to where they could just think ahead on how to lie today so that I know how I can lie tomorrow, especially about something this comprehensive, right? So we're spinning and then flying around 66,600 miles an hour around the sun, and then rocketing, chasing the sun 400 something miles an hour, 480,000 miles, whatever they say, and then the whole shebang's moving sideways. This whole, we wouldn't have the star trails we have, right? There'd be a little more than parallax. So here we have the microcosm of the world, the temple, the lodge, with the black and white checkerboard. It's the microcosm of the macrocosm, right? So the lodge represents the earth. Generally, the arch represents the dome. Okay? So, Masonically orienting something. Just a moment. Alright, sorry, I had to cough for a second. Masonically orienting something entails aligning it to the cardinal directions. What's a cardinal direction on a sphere, by the way? We can also do this with corners of oblique squares like the so-called baseball diamond or boxing ring. This tile is rotated 45 degrees from the one above. The figure of two overlapping squares is very popular in world masonry. Both St. Peter's and the Dome of the Rock shared this form. Freemasons in the ancient occult ritual of circumambulation. Okay, we have a drawing here, okay, on where you enter the lodge and you make the procession and all that, okay. They're imitating the path of the sun. So one of the reasons I wanted to address this is, in general, I hear a lot of people say not incorrectly, but they say correctly that most Masons don't fully understand what they're actually doing and the symbols and the information. That's true, right? So let's say, although college is insane and absurd now, but let's say you go to college, right, and there's 30 people in your class, 26 of them are mediocre at best. We know this, right, from experience. And very few are going to rise to the top, and more specifically, very few are going to have the combination of the skill set and the desire to excel and really master their craft, as the Freemasons call it, right? When you hear that phraseology, master your craft, you're probably dealing with a Freemason. So, master your craft, right? So, it's the same thing in college, right? Some people apply themselves, some don't. So, I can guarantee you that in the lodge, many of them are just networking and stuff, and they don't care about applying themselves and really getting to the heart of what this stuff is. Really, that's probably why Freemason was even able to be successful, because you didn't have everybody holding its feet to the fire. Most of the people are just networking. They're just like own like a construction company or something. You're networking in this whatever with other old men, and they got other companies, and like you're connecting and all that shit, you know. That's most of what people are doing. However, and people say, well, once you get to the 30th degree and all that, then you start to learn stuff, right? So I'm going to show you here that even in the Blue Lodge, the first 3 degrees, that they're doing flat earth rituals. So again, are there people doing that ritual who are so dumb that they don't even realize what they're doing? I can guarantee you, yes. But it's still a flat earth ritual and it's very, very obvious. So let's get into this. I don't think they all are ignorant to it. Just a moment. Sorry about that. And as the circumambulation is made around the lodge like the sun moves around the earth, we have the symbolism that the lodge is a symbol of the world. Squaring the lodge. Are you a traveler? Yes, traveling from west to east. Entering the lodge on the west end, you are blindfolded. Worshipful master sits on the east end, junior and senior warden. The deacon grabs you by the right hand and guides you around the altar. The deacon represents the God within you guiding you. They recite biblical scripture while you walk because allegedly you are the prophet hearing the word. The west representing the sunset, mental, spiritual darkness. The east representing the sunrise, the spiritual light, the origin of consciousness. Luciferianism plain as day, right in your face. Okay? That's why they say they're when they used to do the whole "are you traveling" thing. I don't know if they still do that or whatever, but they'd say yes, traveling from west to east, because you're traveling to the origin of consciousness. You're trying to achieve the light. Now, we come now to the rite of the mystic journey, wherein the candidate travels from east to west by way of the south. That's the key words. By way of the south. If it said way of the north, you're talking about counterclockwise, and you're talking about going against the grain, against the toroidal energy. Okay? Moving on. A ceremony of much interest and many meanings. How it found its way into our ritual is, I believe, a mystery, though some have sought its origin in the operative custom of leading the initiate from one station to another for examination. But this origin seems unreasonable because such a journey would have been conducted in a very different manner. It is more probable, it's bullshit. It's more probable that circumambulation is one of our inheritances from ancient times. That I would agree with. That makes infinitely more sense. Okay? Primitive people firmly believed that they could wield influence over a god by imitating his actions. They believed the sun to be a god, or the visible embodiment of a god, who made a daily tour of the heavens, beginning in the east in the northern hemisphere, and progressing towards the west by way of the south. It was most natural, therefore, that they should evolve a ceremony in imitation of this. Accordingly, in India, in Egypt, in Greece, and in Rome, we find the early practice of circumambulation. In Greece, the priest, or the priest leading the worshippers, would walk 3 times around the altar, always keeping to the right, sprinkling it the while with meal and holy water. The Romans employed a similar ceremony and called it dextroversum, meaning from the right to the left, being so often used in connection with the rites whereby a person or an object was purified. Circumambulation became, after a time, the Roman equivalent of purification. Also among the Hindus, says Mackey, the same rite of circumambulation has always been practiced. In illustration of which he cites the early morning ceremonies of a Brahmin priest who first adores the sun, then walks towards the west by way of the south, saying, quote, I follow the course of the sun, end quote. Likewise refers to the Druids as having performed the same rite, and to the fact that even in recent years has become a custom in the remoter portions of Ireland. Some have seen in the circular row of stones at Stonehenge a huge altar built for the purposes of circumambulation, and others have seen in various processions of the early Christian church as an example of the same custom. It will be interesting further to note that the Greeks accompanied the journey with a sacred chant, dividing it into 3 parts: the strophe, the antistrophe, and the epode. I don't know how to pronounce stuff, but maybe I did. On which Mackey makes a significant comment. Quote, "The analogy between the chanting of an ode by the ancients and the recitation of a passage of scripture in the Masonic circumambulation will be at once apparent." End quote. The symbolism of ritual circumambulation in Judaism and Islam, a comparative study. I'm just putting a brief clip. I'm not putting the whole thing on there, of course. So, in the course of our research on the relationship between Jewish and Muslim mysticism, we have concentrated in recent studies on the comparison between certain practices shared by both traditions. By the mutual light they shed, particular analogies have proven extremely instructive, often helping to penetrate the symbolic dimensions of not a few doctrinal and ritual prescriptions. We would like to discuss presently what is probably the central ritual held in common by these 2 religions. The ritual of circumambulation, known in Hebrew as Ragava and in Arabic as Taba. The respective roots of Naga, Taba, both signifying to encircle. Circumambulation is not exclusive to Judaism or Islam. Indeed, it is one of the few rituals universally attested among faiths and creeds among the 4 corners of the globe. Invariably performed around a central pole, a terrestrial representation of the supernatural abode or the symbol of the axis mundi. Circumambulation can also be an imitation of the rotation of the sun or the heavenly spheres. Is this being written by a Gnostic? It thus reenacts the flux and movement of the physical realm in contrast to the stability and immutability of the house of God. By exposing the individual to all angles of the deity, such ceremonies, akin to the describing of magic circles, usually have a protective or destructive aim, either through warding off or conjuring up evil. Going against the grain and with the grain. The circumambulation rite is extremely ancient in the Semitic tradition and already appears in the Bible. The 7-fold circuit performed by Joshua and the Israelites, which brought about the fall of Jericho, constitutes, as it were, the paradigmatic model. Since the latter is often referred to in the Judeo-Christian tradition, I reject that term, obviously, it is worthwhile quoting a few lines from the narrative in the book of Joshua. And in the 7 priests bearing the 7 ram's horns before the ark of the Lord went on continually and blew with the horns. And they compassed the city at once and returned to the camp. And so they did 6 days. And it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose early on the dawning of the day and compassed the city after the same manner, 7 times. Only on that day they compassed the city 7 times. Okay, so not only is, because a lot of times Joshua will be invoked by Christians when they're talking about flat earth and stuff, because the Bible is clearly a flat earth book. Joshua didn't just stop the sun. He was doing circumambulation. Okay? Don't tell me that these people believed in the globe, dude. Don't go there. In the Scottish Isles, once a principal seat of the Druidical religion, the people, quote, never come to the ancient sacrificing and fire-hallowing cairns, but they walk 3 times around them from east to west, according to the course of the sun, end quote. Hallowed tour, called Diesel, or round by the south, or the unhallowed tour, Tuafol, called one by the north. You're going against the grain. You're doing the opposite of what the sun is doing. The sun represents that toroidal energy. Okay, it's going in one direction. Okay? That's why they say don't go against the grain. That's right here. They're saying it's unholy to go counterclockwise. Okay? We're getting to the fundamentals of this. We're busting the occult wide open right here, dude. In Masonry, that old and often repeated ode to sun worship is also represented in the point within a circle. Ritual circumambulations in the Syro-Mesopotamian cuneiform text. In the Hindu tradition, the most extensive clockwise circumambulation is called Pradaskanda. I don't know how to say it. You should know by now that I don't know how to pronounce stuff. It concerns all of India, from north to the east, to the south, to the west, and back to the north again. Furthermore, the devout Buddhists circumambulate around tombs and sanctuaries. As for the Near East, the Jericho and Mecca circumambulations are famous. The former is reported in the biblical book of Joshua, in which Joshua displays the power of the Lord in circling Jericho 6 times for 6 days and 7 times on the 7th day, causing the fall of the city walls. The latter is the circumambulation called tawaf, still practiced today by Muslims around the Kaaba. We got similarities. Some Mesopotamian texts of the Ur-3 period from Gersu in the Lagos state record the circumambulations of the main temple in the city, the Inu, of the border district. The most ancient and textual attestations of ritual activities that include a circumambulation could be present in Ebla administrative text 24th century BC. So, what was that person saying? Let's see if I can even find it here. What was he saying here? Though some have sought its origin, the operative custom leading the initiate from one station, it's more probable that circumambulation is one of our inheritances from ancient times. No shit. This didn't start with Freemasonry, right? So I'm going to cap that off right there with part 5 with the circumambulation thing. I don't want this one to be too long. Okay. So thank you guys for checking this out. In general, I have an entire presentation that I put together like on PowerPoint that's like 500 or 600 slides. So I generally have my info in there. It's not completely edited. So what I'm doing is I'm going through and making sure I have enough edited to do a video. The information is there, it's just not refined and looks like crap. So slowly but surely I'm getting through this one at a time. I may not do one next week, but I will do one as soon as possible. Thank you guys. Peace out.